Welcome to the Substitute for War video blog number 2. I'm going to be calling this segment Where Do They Go From Here? As well, I'll look at teams that just got eliminated from the playoffs, and I'll talk about the upcoming summer, next season, how they should feel about their place in the league, and basically, as the title says, where do they go from here? I'll start with the New York Knicks, who were eliminated by 5 games as the 7th seed to the 2nd seed Heat. It really was not a competitive series. The Heat are just too good for them. And the Knicks fans are pretty upset right now because they just don't have the assets to make a big leap from pretender to contender next year. They don't have a first round pick. They don't have cap space. They don't have any other tradable assets. So basically, they just have to bide their time. They're probably going to get knocked out again next year. And Knicks fans don't like that because they want to win the title as soon as possible. They want the gratification of taking the next step, and nobody likes to go into a season knowing they're not going to compete. So basically, the Knicks, the way I justify where they are is that to really compete for an NBA title one day, they're going to have to. It's going to take years, just because that's what smart franchises have to do. Their best moves are planned years ahead of time, and it would just take one step at a time. And if they don't have the flexibility this summer, they have to really look at how do we get the flexibility 2 summers from now, let alone next summer. Maybe 2 summers, 3 summers from now is when you can really take the next step up. And until then, next year they're going to have to try and get a top 5 seed, see if they can win the division, and there might even be a dark horse Eastern Conference Finals contender, because with the Bulls probably being a lame duck next year, there isn't really a lock-in number 2 team behind the Heat next year. So basically, that'll probably be the best season for the Knicks since the Patrick Ewing era, and they just have to accept that just because they don't have a real contender doesn't mean that they can't have a nice season, and a season that is kind of taking the next step. And you just have to take one step at a time. The move the Knicks fans are talking about the most, of course, is what to do with Mo Stoudemire, because he has 4 years left on a max contract, and for what he gave to the team this year, which I'd argue is very little, I think they were just as good without him. Obviously, they aren't getting a huge return on that investment, and it's really hurting their flexibility. They don't have their amnesty clause because they used it on Billups, even though they picked up the option on him at the end of last year. So that's the kind of small move that really hurts the team, because they could have a lot of flexibility if they could amnesty Murray. My argument before the season was just to amnesty Murray then, but that would have been obviously pretty controversial. But anyways, I think there is trades out there for Murray. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if some, like, Charlotte offered like Tyrese Thomas, Sagana Diop, and like Matt Carroll, which is basically the shit sandwich. And maybe that would be a good deal because it would give them a lot of flexibility starting next summer. But at the same time, maybe a better move is just to hold on to Murray, let him put up his stats next year, and let his contract get shorter, and then revisit whether they can actually trade him for some impact players or young players. Yeah. So, like I said with the Knicks, just because they can't immediately contend doesn't mean it's the end of the world, doesn't mean they have to freak out and try to trade Anthony, as I've seen some people suggest. He's definitely not the problem. He's at worst top 4 at his position, at the small forward position. He's a top 15 player in the league probably, and there's some franchises that literally go decades without getting a player that talented. And at the end of the day, the NBA is run on talent, so especially star talent, so you just don't trade one of the most talented players in the league when you have it, because it's just too difficult to get. And I do think the Knicks, they have their big scorer in Anthony, they have the defensive center in Chandler, and those are 2 of the biggest pieces you can have, if not the 2 biggest pieces that you need to build an elite team. So basically, they might even be 70% of the way there. It's just that last 30% is so hard. And finally, a way to look at the Knicks situation as optimistic is if you go back to the end of the Isaiah era. That was really the idea of the Knicks. They're like a junkie hitting bottom in NBA terms. So basically, if you told those fans that in 2012 this is where you'll be. You'll have Anthony, you'll have Murray, he's on the downside, and you'll have Tyson Chandler, Defensive Player of the Year. You have Iban Shumpert, good rookie, and you'll be a playoff team, probably a top 5 team in the conference next year. I think those fans at that point would have been very happy because realistically, it hasn't been that long of a turnaround. There are teams that still haven't made the playoffs since the Isaiah era to now, so it could be much worse. Just because they don't have the best situation in the league doesn't mean that they don't have a pretty good one. So that's the Knicks. The next team I'll talk about are the Bulls, who went down in 6 games to Philadelphia, and obviously, and the Bulls are the 1 seed, Philadelphia 8 seed. Obviously, Rose's ACL played a huge, being torn played a huge part in that, because the Sixers could just, they just game planned the Bulls' flawed offense without Rose and just completely shut it down, and they had all the tools to do that. So the Bulls this summer, priority number 1 is obviously to find some kind of point guard to replace Rose. The most logical fit of a player that's probably available is Devin Harris, just because he is the poor man's Rose in style of play. I could say move for Jose Calderon because I think he's one of the better offensive point guards in the league because he's pass first, he can really run the pick and roll well, and he can shoot. So that'd be interesting. He'd be an interesting fit with Bruiser. Maybe if Jameer Nelson is willing to take a contract in the mid-lower section area, he could be an option. But my concern with the Bulls going forward is that I just don't know if the Tom Thibodeau era has a huge shelf life, just because he might be comparable to guys like Scott Skiles and Larry Brown, and I guess Doug Collins, as someone that those kind of psychotic intensity coaches, attention to detail, the first couple years they coach, their teams usually overperform because their defensive energy is ridiculous and they do everything the coach wants. But in the long run, the players kind of get burnt out because when you play the entire regular season like it's the playoffs, and when you can't make mistakes, and when you're always watching it back for the coach, it just eventually they just tune them out. And then, whereas like a loosey-goosey coach can kind of keep his players going longer. It's almost like using the stick instead of the carrot. It might work for a little while, but eventually it might be a problem. So that's a concern I'd have with them, is that especially with how the season basically just got ripped away from them, that I just don't know if emotionally and mentally they're going to be quite as jacked up next year. Just because it's a long season, the reward is probably going to be low, because even if Derrick Rose comes back, he's probably not going to be 100%. So I would worry about the Bulls' energy level taking a step back, especially if Deng is also injured. Noah always seems to be banged up, so that could be a difficult season for them. The dream option for them is if they could sign Nash to a 1-year deal in the summer, but he'd have to take a pay cut down to the MLE, middle-level exception area, even though it would really benefit him because he'd get to play on a contender. If he's willing to take a pay cut that low, what's to say, that he wouldn't just sign up the Heat or something. So if he's willing to drop his price that low, there's a lot of competitors to the Bulls, so that's the worry of that. I still think the best spot for Nash is the Dallas Mavericks if they don't sign Darren Williams, or maybe the Pacers. So both those teams would have more cap space than the Bulls, so I'm not sure about the Nash idea. But the Bulls next year, they'll probably a playoff team. They just won't quite be at this level, I don't think. Alright, the next team I'm going to talk about are the Magic. Obviously, the Magic, they were the 6th seed. They went down in 5 games to the 3 seed, the Pacers. And again, they just couldn't score enough points about Dwight Howard. They just didn't have the talent to break that Indiana defense. So the Magic the entire summer comes down to Howard. That's not really saying anything groundbreaking, but it really just depends on how bad it is behind the scenes. If it's like a really bad relationship that's irreparable, and Howard doesn't want to even start the next season with them, then they should probably trade him, have some pride, have some class as a franchise, move on quickly, probably tank next year for a top 5 pick, and see if they can get a star right away. It's probably the best move for them. the actual return that they get for Howard is probably going to be a beggars can't be choosers situation. They're just two against the wall. And I'm guessing the Nets is still the front runner because that just seems like what Howard actually wants to play. Yeah, so maybe Orlando gets Brook Lopez, Marshawn Brooks, a couple draft picks, which doesn't make a huge difference, but they're assets and they can do something. And I think Brooks in particular, you make him like the best scorer on a bad team. Maybe he has some upside beyond what he's being given credit for. So that's a big thing for the Nets is for the Magic is the Ryan Anderson situation. He just won Most Improved Player. He had what will probably be his career season. And the worry of him is that a lot of people are pegging him as the classic someone that the contract he gets this summer is going to be overpaying him because his offensive skill set of hitting open threes and being the perfect stretch power forward for Dwight Howard, it's really not going to fit as well. If, for example, he's all of a sudden the number one option on the Magic next year if they're a really bad team without Howard. Because then he'll be guarded all the time, and I just don't see him having the versatility as a shot creator to take that kind of pressure, defensive pressure. So, yeah, if he gets like a 5-year, $50 million contract, that could be bad news in a couple of years. It could be an unmovable contract. So that's a concern for them. But at the same time, they really don't have anything to lose, and they might as well owe it to the fans to re-sign him just because to give them some player next year that they know and can be excited seeing at the stadium and stuff. Jameer Nelson's also a free agent, unrestricted free agent. I could see them re-signing him too, just because he's part of the history now. He was on the All-Star. He made the All-Star team the year they made the finals. And again, he'd give them some player to make them not horrible next year. Maybe more bad than horrible. So that's the Magic. I'm sure I have lots to say about them in the summer as well. So the last team I'll talk about really briefly is the Atlanta Hawks. Obviously the Hawks, they just had the same kind of season they always do. They were decent enough to make the playoffs thanks to athleticism and some skill, but they're just not talented enough to actually make a run. And the players are too limited to, once they really get game planned against in a playoff series, it really shows their flaws as a team. So the Hawks, everyone's saying blow it up, I agree. And the main reason is that, for a couple reasons, Joe Johnson I just see as a grenade in that his contract, 4 years at Kobe money, it might be tradable now, but there's going to be a point in his early 30s where he falls off, and then it won't be tradable. So basically, you just have to wonder the risk of holding that contract versus the reward of keeping Johnson, which I don't seem very high. Because if they're risking the chance of that grenade going off, so to speak, then they could be left with just a devastating contract at some point. The Hawks could also look at shopping Josh Smith. He had his best season, probably should have made the All-Star team. But obviously there's some behind-the-scenes problems with him, it sounds like. So maybe some names to look out with him are like Amonte Ellis, Andre Iguodala, Al Jefferson, something like that, just to mix it up, give them a different dynamic, give the fans something different to watch. But the main reason I would move quickly with the Hawks, if I were the Hawks, is that long-term, Al Horford, his contract runs out sometime when he's in his late 20s, but I think they should start thinking ahead because if they're just in this middling situation when he becomes an unrestricted free agent, they're just not going to have a chance to keep him. So the best move is to do kind of what Portland did, where they blew up the team a little bit, got some draft picks, and they're going to try to get some young infrastructure around Marcus Aldridge. And that's basically what Atlanta has to try and do around Al Horford. Or Josh Smith, they keep him. Maybe they keep Josh Smith, trade Al Horford. But basically, just try to build a new team, new young players, and just hope for the best. Hope that, because the longer they keep this going, the more likely that they're just going to lose Horford one day. So that's video blog number 2. I have to wrap this up. I have to be under 15 minutes. So thanks for listening. I'll do the Western Conference teams when the first round wraps up for them. Thank you.